Shalom. So in this video, we're going to discuss a very important topic, the sacrifice of Jesus. I'm going to prove to you why it violates every law given to the Levitical priests or in the Torah concerning animal sacrifices. Now, before we start, like I said, I'm going to keep it short. I'm only going to pull out a few scriptures for the sake of the video. I don't want it to go too long. Now, in the New Testament, it states that his death was the end of sacrifices for sin, right? It also states that all the sacrifices in the Torah, which are given, for the animal sacrifices, that those were just foreshadowings, that those were a shadow of what Jesus is going to do. He fulfilled all those animal sacrifices, and that he's a perfect example, and his sacrifice was perfect. Now, there's a problem with that, because it should be completely aligned and cohesive with the animal sacrifice system in the Old Testament. It violates almost every law given in the Torah concerning animal sacrifices. We're going to prove that. We're going to start off with who performed the animal sacrifices in the Old Testament, or the Tanakh. The Levites, the priests, were the ones that performed these sacrifices. Jesus' death, who performed his sacrifice? The Romans. Unclean heathens. These were not set apart priests who performed the sacrifice. Another thing, in the New Testament, it claims that Jesus died on the Passover, that he's the Passover lamb that takes away the sins of the world. There's a big problem with that, because you guys have him dying on the wrong feast day. In the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the Passover lamb is not a sin sacrifice. It is a sacrifice, but not for sin. It doesn't take away the sin of anybody. So you have them dying on the wrong feast day. Now, the feast day in the Torah that does take away the sins of the people is the Day of Atonement. Jesus did not die on the Day of Atonement. So that's already a violation and an error, that it is not aligned with the Torah. Now, on the Day of Atonement in Leviticus, there were 3 animals that were brought up. A bull sacrifice, which was for the priest who was performing the sacrificial system. Did the Romans bring a bull in the story of Jesus' sacrifice? Did the Romans say, hey, I got to sacrifice a bull because I got to make sure it matches the Torah, so it is a foreshadowing, right? There's no bull. The Romans are not high priests. They are not set apart. They do not have the holy garments. It completely contradicts the sacrificial system, which God is very serious about in the Old Testament. You would lose your life if you didn't perform these correctly. Now, next, there was 2 other animals, the goat and the lamb, the scapegoat and the unblemished lamb. Now, in the New Testament, they claim Jesus is the lamb that bared the sins of the people, right? That he carried the sins. The problem with that is, in the Old Testament, in Leviticus 16, the unblemished lamb was the one that was sacrificed. It didn't bear any sins. The one they call a scapegoat was sent off to the wilderness. It would bear the sins of the people. It didn't get killed. It didn't get sacrificed. So now Christians in the New Testament, they want to make Jesus everything. They're going to say, whether you call on Jesus, Yeshua, Yahushua, or Yahushai, it's all the same deity I'm speaking about. You guys have different doctrines, but it's grounded in the same. Now, Jesus in the New Testament, he bared the sins and he died. And they want to make them everything. They're trying to make them both goats. They're trying to make them Passover. They're trying to make them atonement, because it doesn't line up. Next, we're going to bring up is, let's see, the priests in the Torah, when they had to perform the sacrifice, they had to sprinkle the blood on the altar and on the mercy seat. I ask you, in Jesus' scenario, did the Romans sprinkle his blood on the altar or on the mercy seat, which would cost you your life in the Old Testament if you did not do this? That's the point I'm making, is God is very serious on these commandments in the Tanakh to do it exactly how he has prescribed it. In the New Testament, Jesus' death and his sacrifice is violating everything in the Torah. It's time for you guys to wake up and see this kind of stuff. Next, we're going to bring up is the lamb that was sacrificed without sin, that was unblemished. It's supposed to be a yearling. It's not supposed to be what Jesus was, early 30s, who was beaten, who was bruised for the transgressions of the people. He was not unblemished, and he surely wasn't a yearling lamb. The point I'm making is we could go on forever speaking about the contradictions of Jesus' death, let alone that a human sacrifice, that's another one, is condemned in the Old Testament. I say this to a lot of people I meet. I asked them, hey, what is the biggest cult or what is the biggest religion you know in the world that honors human sacrifice? And a lot of them like to bring up Aztecs or the Mayans or a lot of the cultures out here in the West. Even though the ancient Israelites were doing these pagan customs in the Old Testament, you see them sacrificing their kids in the fire to Baal. Now, a lot of Christians today will condemn that behavior. They condemn human sacrifice of someone pure, of a virgin or someone young, like they do in some of these other cultures, right? A lot of Christian churches will demonize that behavior, yet not realizing that their religion is the biggest cult on earth that accepts human sacrifice. They believe Jesus is the Son of God. Some of you guys are Trinitarians and you say Jesus is God. Regardless, you guys are honoring a human sacrifice, which the Torah, the ways of God, the God of Israel, he condemns that behavior. So like I said, I want to make this video short. It's time for you guys to wake up. I'm not here to offend any of the brethren. I'm here to wake you guys up, especially you Christians. I was a Christian for a long time. I understand the dogma. Even went to seminary. I know exactly what they're saying, what they teach, because I used to teach it and believe it too. It's time to repent, come back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and live a Torah life. Shalom.